Scott, how are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. Yourself?
Good. Good.
I think you're muted. There.
Now, can you hear me?
Now I can hear you, yes.
Okay, the audio is just playing up. So it's good. It's going to be with less quality, but it's fine. So as we're speaking, Iran is attacking Israel. So there's ballistic missiles heading towards Tel Aviv as we speak. So I'm going to share it with the audience as we get the news coming in. But Scott, initial reaction, obviously things are developing by the minute. We had Israel attack multiple targets and multiple commanders. We've got the chief of staff of the armed forces. We've got the commander of the IRGC, the commander of the Qatam al-Anbaniya central headquarters, multiple Air Force commanders. The list goes on who was targeted by Israel. We've also got multiple nuclear facilities that were targeted as well. What's your initial reaction, Scott, as you see this developing?
Well, first of all, this is a decisive measure taken by Israel. What I mean by decisive is that Israel is all in on whatever objective it is they're trying to achieve. There's talk that this is ostensibly targeted against Iran's, nuclear infrastructure, but I believe that the goals and objectives of this this assault are far greater. I believe that this is a regime change activity, that this is an existential struggle between Israel and Iran, and that Israel's goal is the elimination of the theocracy that rules Iran right now. So Israel, came in heavy, and I think what we're seeing is that it wasn't enough. Now Iran is retaliating. We'll find out what kind of retaliation Iran is able to put forward. If it is as if it's a decisive retaliation, maybe it can cause Israel to reconsider what it's trying to do. If it's not decisive, then we are going to be in for a longer campaign. But I don't think this ends in negotiation. I think that what I mean by that is I don't think this ends with the maintenance of the status quo. Either Iran is defeated and the regime is overthrown, or Israel is compelled to back away from insisting on that Iran comply with Israel's demands regarding nuclear enrichment and Iran's role in the Middle East. But this appears to be a major conflict, not a minor exchange.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get more information on the retaliation by Iran. Now, we had reports that there'll be potentially over 100 ballistic missiles by Iran towards Israel. But before we even get to Iran's response, just the fact that Israel essentially declared war on Iran. This is not just a one-off attack. This is not a tit for tat. It's not within rules of engagement. Like, hey, I hit you, I inform you in advance, and you hit me back. You inform me in advance, just to be symbolic to both our citizens of each of our respective countries. This is a declaration of war. So essentially, and Israel initially said it will be a 2-week campaign, and now says the attack will continue. As we're seeing here, the footage, these are the missiles by Iran towards Israel being intercepted. But what is Israel's goal with this? Is it really a regime change? And if so, how long will this take, and what are the repercussions regionally and geopolitically when we talk about international repercussions, including oil prices and the rest of the markets?
Well, I mean, this is interesting. What is what is the objective of Israel's campaign? First of all, we need to start out with the notion and the reality that Israel cannot, using conventional weapons, Israel cannot terminate Iran's nuclear program. That's been admitted by the Israeli government itself. That in order to achieve the elimination of Iran's nuclear program, the Iranian government will have to make decisions regarding, the dismantling of this program, if indeed that's what they seek to do. So that means that this conflict isn't about physical destruction, but about achieving a political, outcome. And to achieve a political outcome, you need to change the way Iran is governed. Right now, you have a government that is very heavily influenced by more conservative elements who are openly hostile to Israel. and they have every reason to be. I'm not condemning them for this. I'm simply pointing out a reality. One of the goals and objectives of Israel's preemptive strike, their Pearl Harbor attack on Iran, was a decapitation strike, specifically targeting the very personalities who had been articulating in favor of a ballistic missile strike against Israel, True Promise 3, things of that nature. And Israel took them out. That means that Israel is hoping that a more moderate wing within the Iranian government will articulate a policy of moderation to avoid the kind of escalation we're seeing right now. It appears that Israel has failed. I mean, this notion of decapitation, it was successful against Hezbollah. It was indirectly successful in a different way in Syria. And I think the Israelis were gambling that by taking out these senior level officials who were very hardline, that they would create confusion, sow dissent, and create the possibility of Iran backing down. But Iran has shown resilience. They have replaced the assassinated personnel, and it appears that decisions have been made that are leading to the activity we're seeing unfold on the screen as we speak. But I think there's another goal and objective here too. The United States has shown reticence in becoming directly involved in Israel's attack on Iran because of the consequences that American forces deployed in the region would face. But it's clear that the United States was complicit in this attack, that we provided diplomatic cover for this attack, and that we were knowledgeable of the scope and scale of this attack, including the methodologies being employed. Iran now has to make a decision. Do they focus on retaliating against Israel and keep this as purely an Iranian-Israeli conflict, or do they do as they had promised in the past, strike American targets in the region, thereby inviting a direct American military retaliation?
So I want to ask you another question about the successes that Israel's had with this attack. We're seeing a lot of similarities to their attacks on Hezbollah, essentially decapitating the leadership and then striking key targets. We also have reports that the attack also had similarities to what Ukraine did in Russia. There's reports here of drone bases, explosive drone bases within Iran that were built, that were used in this attack. We've had reports of vehicles carrying weapon systems smuggled into Iran, being able to take out Iranian defenses. And we've also got reports of a covert effort by Mossad's commandos deploying precise missiles near anti-aircraft sites in central Iran. So obviously it's been prepared for a very, very long time. And it seems similar to Hezbollah. Iran's government, Iran's military, Iran's intelligence has been infiltrated by Israel. What does that say about Iran's capabilities? Did we overestimate those capabilities? And also the airspace, Scott, it just seems completely, Israel has complete freedom in dominating the airspace.
Well, I think, first of all, we have to acknowledge that Israel was successful in catching Iran by surprise. The Iranians, at some point in time, if they survive this, will have to do an after-action report on why they were caught unprepared. But, remember, it was Donald Trump who focused on Sunday, the sixth round of negotiations, as being decisive, and Benjamin Netanyahu weighing in, saying, yes, we will await the outcome of the Sunday negotiations before we make a decision on what to do. And so I think Iran was focused on Sunday and preparing for something, for escalation potentially after Sunday, and were caught unprepared. Their defense officials went home. The fact that the Israelis knew where these people lived, what floor, what room to strike, to kill them, shows that there is an intelligence failure in Iran, that the Israelis have been successful in penetrating Iran. But we had a hint of this earlier. If you remember, this isn't the first time a drone was used in Iran. The Israelis used a drone, a short-range drone, to assassinate Hania, the Hamas official, in Tehran on the day that the Iranian president was inaugurated, which means that that drone could have easily been used to assassinate the president, the supreme leader, and everybody at the inauguration ceremony. That should have sent a signal to the Iranians that their space has been violated, because if Israel can dispatch one drone to carry out a daring, bold assassination in the daylight hours in Tehran, what's them to stop to do what they've done? And clearly Israel has infiltrated Iran, and these drone attacks were very, very successful. But it's not just about getting the drones into Iran. Targeting these drones, getting them to where, when they launch, they know where to go to hit. The video that shows some of the attacks on these buildings show precision strike. This isn't from an air-delivered munition. This is a suicide drone hitting the building at a specific angle. The Iranians knew the timing and the location, and they did the same thing with air defense and deployed ballistic missiles. This implies very good intelligence on the ground by the Israelis that is being updated in real-time capability. And as you mentioned, the ability of Israel to deploy special operations forces on the ground in Iran in a militarized area to where they are able to actually line of sight target air defense and ballistic missile capability. It shows a tremendous amount of professional skill, but also an absolute failure on the part of Iran to secure its space. Now, I think we saw on the day of the attack, just like with the Americans at Pearl Harbor, the Japanese had pretty much free run of the airspace over Pearl Harbor and over the Hawaiian Islands. Today, it appears to be a different story. Israel launched a second wave of attacks, and apparently their air defense is back up and running, and there are reports of them shooting down at least 2 Israeli aircraft with Israeli pilots ejecting, and that they were successfully able to intercept many of the missiles that Israel launched. So it appears that, Iran is recovering, and this would be bad news for Israel, because one of the hopes, I think, of Israel was to make the Iranians feel naked, make them feel unsecure, make them feel vulnerable. But if Iran is able to reconstitute its air defenses and actively defend its airspace, that means that Iran now feels secure enough to launch retaliation attacks and be prepared for a longer term campaign. But I will just tell you, somebody who has direct experience in this, to deploy special operations forces deep into denied territory is something that doesn't happen by luck, and it isn't something that just happens overnight. The Israelis have been preparing for this attack for some time. This means that they have done rehearsals of this attack, and it also means that they have coordinated very closely with the United States.
So going to the United States, how involved do you think the U.S. was? Because initially we had reports based on what Marco Rubio said, the Secretary of State. He said Israel took unilateral action against Iran. We are not involved in strikes against Iran, and our top priority is protecting American forces in the region. But then you have Trump, when he wakes up and goes online, says something almost contradicts Marco Rubio, says he knew about the attacks, supports the attacks, there's more to come if Iran does not accept a deal. How involved is the U.S. and how involved could the U.S. get as this war continues?
Well, we only have one president, and he outranks the Secretary of State. So it's clear that the President of the United States has spoken on this issue, and I will put the weight of who I want to believe more. I'll put it on Trump. And Trump's words are clear that the United States was deeply involved in this, to the point where we provided specific weapon systems designed to achieve specific results. But I will give you an aspect of this that people aren't talking about, but they should reflect upon. General Kurilla, who's the commander of U.S. Central Command, has briefed the White House on our strike plans, our strike options with Iran. Now, remember, if Donald Trump says, I know that the Israelis were preparing to attack, I'm familiar with their plan, I know what they were striking, etc., that means Central Command knows this as well. If General Kurilla is briefing the White House on strike plans, that means that we have a deconfliction plan with Israel. That means that if we are to send American aircraft into Iran, that we will deconflict with the Israelis, which means we are intimately involved with the Israelis in every aspect of their planning. For instance, if they have special operations forces on the ground, they will communicate the areas where they are so that we don't attack them, we don't strike them, that we protect them. If they will send in helicopters to rescue these people or redeploy these people, that will be coordinated with our aircraft so that we don't shoot them down. When they launch a strike, we'll ensure that our aircraft are deconflicted from the areas that their missiles are flying in. And if we launch a strike, they will deconflict. This means that American military planners are seated right next to Israeli military planners, and that it is a singular plan. It's a plan that Israel has executed by itself at this point. But at a moment's notice, the United States will be able to seamlessly integrate into this operation. And that can only happen if we've had long and meaningful and close collaboration with the Israelis on their attack plans.
So according to Israel, so far, there's been no injuries reported following the Iranian missile barrage. That's the first barrage. There could be more. I don't know if it's still ongoing, but so far there's no casualties. Based on what you've seen so far, does that surprise you? Similar to how Hezbollah surprised many. I'm not sure if it surprised you as well. Hezbollah's the speed in which Hezbollah was or the military command was destroyed, and their inability to really respond to Israel. Because I remember, Scott, in the old days when the war first started, we always discussed there's a red line. If Israel's in war with Hezbollah, that's a red line. We don't know how bad this could get. And Hezbollah has a lot of rockets and missiles that could reach deep into Israel. Yeah. The result was Hezbollah couldn't do much. Israel exceeded most people's expectations. And it seems like we're seeing something very similar here with Iran, especially after the report now of limited to no casualties. It says no casualties according to Israel. Would you agree with that analysis?
Again, we don't know the scope and scale of the Iranian retaliation, but we were led to believe that this retaliation would involve thousands of missiles and that it would level Israel, be fatal and lethal to Israel. Even recently, the Iranian military put out a post on X saying that Iran's retaliation will be lethal. Don't blame us.
Yeah, and they just said, and to your point, that agrees with you. The Ayatollah Khamenei just said our response has only just begun. That just came in now. Also, there's been a report as well that headquarters at Kuria in Tel Aviv was struck by an Iranian ballistic missile. It's according to Channel 13. So it's two reports that kind of contradict the point I was just making that just came in.
Well, I've actually been in the Kuria, and it's Israel's most secure, sensitive military facility for command and control. I would be surprised if the Israelis were doing work in above ground structures, but there are below the ground bunkers there and elsewhere where they would, but this is the kind of target you would expect Iran to hit. And if they're hitting the Kuria, that means that they're hitting other facilities as well. There'll be governmental facilities. Look, Israel went after senior Iranian officials, so I think the gloves are off. We'll see, but Iran promised thousands of missiles. What we know about some of the Israeli targeting over the past day is that they have struck very heavily Iran's ballistic missile storage facilities, their operational bases, and even these underground missile cities that Iran had bragged about building that were supposed to be, invulnerable to attack. If Iran is incapable of sorting 1,000 missiles, that means that Israel has been very effective at, digging into Iran's stockpiles. But on the other hand, if this attack is just beginning, what Iran will do is come in with an initial wave. What they'll seek to do, to be honest, is to exhaust ballistic missile on-hand stocks. They understand what reload capacity is, etc. And if they have the missiles available, they will flood the zone with missiles, exhaust the stocks, and then their final strike, when the Israelis have run out of ability to defend themselves, will be to send in their most effective systems to carry out the most damage. So if Iran struck the Kuria early on, this is bad news for Israel. That means that probably a missile that's not Iran's best missile got through Israel's defense when it's at its strongest. And if this is happening the way the Supreme Leader suggests, and it's a continuous wave of attacks, the final wave will consist of the Fatah 2 and other more advanced systems, and it'll be a bad day for Israel. But we don't know if the Fatah 2 survived. We don't know what Iran has. I guess we'll find out.
Do you think Israel will strike the Supreme Leader if they get the chance, similar to how they did with the leader Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah?
Nasrallah was not a head of state. Nasrallah, according to the Israelis, was a terrorist leader at the head of a terrorist organization. So the legal restraints that would normally apply to heads of state, it's a dangerous business if you get into starting to assassinate heads of state. These military officials are part of a legitimate military command and control, which is a legitimate target under wartime. But if you take out a head of state, especially a religious leader like the Ayatollah Khamenei, not only is Benjamin Netanyahu's life forfeit, but any hope that you have of trying to convince the Iranians to move towards a negotiated settlement is out the window, because now you will incur the wrath of not just.
But do you think they are trying to move Iran to a negotiation? Because
I believe ultimately
it's either that or trying for a regime change. Because they're aiming for a regime change, negotiations is kind of off the table completely.
I think regime change, it depends how you define it. They would like to see the collapse of the conservative arm of the theocracy. Whether or not they will be successful in ending Vilayat-e Faqih and the rule of supreme jurisprudence, and ending the dominance of the supreme leader is a question. But I think what they would like to see is a moderate, like the current president of Iran, being dominant in the formulation of national security policy, and to see the significant reduction of the influence of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. I think that might be a more realistic regime change. Although we have seen in the past that Israel, together with other services, have influence with Kurds, with the Baluch, with Arab independent movement, with the monarchists, with the Mujahideen al-Khalq, to put pressure and try to achieve collapse from within. But I think the short-term realistic goals for the Israelis is to get the conservatives that currently dominate Iranian national security policy making, to get them to be diminished, and have moderates take control, and get the moderates to the table. And maybe the moderates will be willing to voluntarily, when I say voluntarily, under coercion, give up Iran's nuclear program. So then Israel gets both things. They eliminate the nuclear program, and they get a change of regime in Iran.
So I've got two pieces of news here as well while we're speaking. The Israeli military has confirmed 7 direct hits against Tel Aviv, and they claim 50 missiles were intercepted. Your thoughts on those numbers, if they're accurate? 7 out of 50, that's a 14% success rate.
Well, we don't know the total number launched, but if Israel intercepted
50 and 7 hit, so I would guess 7 out of 50.
Yeah, and let's say
7 out of 57, so about.
Yeah, let's say
12%.
3 malfunctions, along the way. So let's say that Iran launched 60 missiles, 7 out of 60 in the first wave. That's stunning. In the first wave, first of all, 60 missiles is not a saturation attack. 60 missiles is, I'm feeling out your defenses attack. 60 missiles is gathering intelligence on, launch density, how many missiles of different kinds come in. I don't know what the flight pattern is of these. Did they launch different missiles that come in at different trajectories and different, because what you want to do is see when David's sling, which is a type of missile, gets activated, when the arrow gets activated, if THAAD gets activated, the American system, when do certain radars get turned on. The Iranians will have a whole intelligence gathering capability in place to feed this out. And then they feed that into their second wave and their third wave to try and fine tune it. So the fact that 7 missiles, if this is just the first wave, got through is a big deal. Now, if all Iran had left were 60 Fatah 2 missiles and they fired those and 7 got through, that's still significant, but it means that there isn't going to be a follow-on punch here. That's it. So we don't know what's left in the Iranian inventory. If this is the beginning of a broader retaliation strike tonight, it's bad news for Israel. It's going to be a long night, and it's going to be a very difficult night. But if this is it, if that was the only attack,
so the success rate of this attack is impressive. But if this is the only attack, depending on the capacity that's left for Iran, then that is a concern for Iran, and then Israel's got the upper hand if they'll have it already. But then Iran did not, at least to meet the minimum expectations that one would have had in terms of retaliation. So now what we're waiting for is what the next waves of attacks will be, how many missiles they have less that they can actually launch before Israel preemptively strikes them.
Iran's only hope is to deliver a devastating blow against Israel that's so harsh, so strong, so damaging that Israel will have second thoughts about continuing this campaign. that the United States may feel compelled to intervene to stop the damage to Israel. If all Iran does is hit Israel 7 times, Israel can absorb that attack. Iran needs to hit Tel Aviv 700 times. They need to take out energy facilities. They need to take out the things that make Israel function. They need to turn the lights out. They need to kill senior government officials. They need to put terror in the hearts of every Israeli. They need to diminish Israel's ability to continue this conflict by striking airfields. That's what a 1,000 missile attack does, which Iran promised. If they can do that attack, then Iran can maybe get this war to end. If they can't do that attack, then Iran will be able to do a lengthy campaign, but a lengthy campaign does not play to the benefit of Iran.
Do you think Iran will strike the Strait of Hormuz and destroy their economy and
that
impact the rest of the world economically?
Yeah, I think that's an act of desperation that takes place at the end, if it takes place at all. Shutting down the Strait of Hormuz, attacking the oil infrastructure of its neighboring states is something Iran has promised to do if their nuclear facilities were attacked. But right now, again, I think one of the objectives of having Israel go in alone is that it keeps the United States military fist held as a reserve, as a threat looming over the horizon. And if Iran does shut down the Strait of Hormuz, if it does attack neighboring oil infrastructure, it invites the Americans to intervene. So I think it's in Iran's best interest at this point in time not to expand the conflict, not to strike American bases, not to shut the Strait of Hormuz, not to attack infrastructure. Now, Israel has promised that if Iran retaliated, Israel would strike Iran's oil production capability. If Israel does that, that changes the game, because Iran's not going to just sit there and allow a
second wave was just launched. The IDF confirms the launch of a second wave of Iranian missiles against Israel.
Yep. So this looks like it could be a long night for Israel then.
Continue, please.
No, I mean, if this happens, this could be a long night for Israel. Again, I believe it's how I would do it. I would launch a wave, and then I would collect intelligence, and then use that intelligence to fine-tune my second wave, and then launch that wave. Because what you want is the final wave of attacks to come in, and Israel not have any ability to intercept, etc. These initial attacks that are happening are designed to absorb the ballistic missile defense capabilities of Israel and the United States, and to gather intelligence. The final attack is when the ballistic missile defense capabilities have been exhausted, or you have a solution to them, and you come in and you hit what you need to hit on that final one. So if this is a second attack, I believe we're probably in for a long night of at least 5 or 6 waves of attacks.
So essentially, if Iran is able to launch 1,000 missiles, and a lot of them do strike, if a few hundred missiles do strike Israel, do you think Israel will de-escalate the war?
It depends what they hit.
Sort of peace agreement?
Well, it depends what they hit. I mean, if it's one thing for Netanyahu to talk about, the Israeli people need to be strong. Israel's never been hit like this. Israel's never been hit like this. And if Iran is able to come in and shut out the lights, if Iran is able to hit the Domino reactor, if Iran is able to kill senior Israeli officials, if Iran is able to strike terror into the hearts of the Israelis to the point where a significant portion of the Israeli population starts fleeing Israel, depopulation of Israel is the death of Israel. The Israeli government would be foolish to continue this, especially if Iran had continued capacity to strike the next night and the next night and the next night. And I do believe that's the only hope Iran has. I wrote an article about this earlier today where I said Iran's only hope is to strike Israel so hard that Israel is compelled, because of domestic political pressure and reality, to stop this campaign and get the United States to try and come in and broker some sort of arrangement, or get the Russians to come in and broker some sort of arrangement.
How could the U.S. be dragged into this war further than already is? Do you think Iran will attack the U.S. bases despite Marco Rubio's warnings? And we're seeing, by the way, live here, we're seeing the second wave of attacks. These are Israeli missiles heading towards Israel. And we'll see how many hit Israel, if any, this time around. Scott, go ahead.
I think right now Iran is looking at a problem set that is very difficult. That is, how do you defeat Israel? I can tell you how you don't defeat Israel. You don't defeat Israel by getting the United States directly involved in this war. And what I mean by directly is kinetically involved with American aircraft, American bombs, American rockets. So I believe it's in Iran's interest right now to keep the United States physically out of this war. And you do that by limiting your strikes to Israel. There's no reason right now for Iran to strike American military bases. That would just complicate the picture, complicate the problem set for Iran. Iran needs this war to come to an end soon. To do that, Iran needs to smack, excuse my language, the dog poop out of Israel. So hard that Israel has no choice but to turn to the United States and Russia and say, okay, we need this thing to end now, and then get a negotiated settlement. But that won't happen if you bring in the United States. If you bring in the United States, we're taking this to a completely different level, one that I don't think Iran has the capacity to survive.
We're seeing this attack, seems the Iranian missiles we're seeing on the video right now. It seems that it's less than the previous attack. How do these waves work? Is every wave usually bigger than the one prior? Are they usually about the same amount of missiles? Do they vary? How do these things work generally?
Well, one of the things you have to realize is that we're looking at a fixed camera location. And so Israel is big. We don't know what the target is. When I think these waves, when they come in, they will be saturation waves over a given a target deck. So let's say the first wave of attacks was against the Kiryat. We may get visual confirmation of that. I think we saw a couple missiles hit. But what if the second wave is against Haifa? This camera may not see that. What you may be seeing is missile launches going up to intercept missiles, but you won't see the actual impact. Or if they attack Domino, again, we won't see the missiles coming into Domino or hitting some of the airfields that are in Ramat Gan and other airfields that are in the north and in the south. So it's a little deceptive being a prisoner of this camera that you may not see the incoming
You're
missiles.
right. I just got another footage. I've got another footage now. I'm not sure if the editors could play it. It's just the latest post for the team. It's the latest post on my profile. And you see missiles flying over Lebanon towards Israel. That could be towards Haifa, as you said,
Haifa,
Scott.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. We'll see if that's the target. Where are the Israeli nuclear facilities or the main bases, the main strategic bases for Israel? Is it in Tel Aviv, near Tel Aviv? Is it near Haifa?
No, the Domino reactor is sort of the headquarters of the Israeli nuclear facility. That's where they do their nuclear production and manufacturing. The missile bases are actually located along the coast south of Tel Aviv towards Ashdod. There's missile bases there. The Israelis would probably, based upon past precedent, have moved the missiles out of those bases into deployment areas in the Negev desert. And then also, Israeli aircraft have the ability to carry. So you'll have bunkers at various Israeli air bases that have nuclear capable aircraft where nuclear weapons could be stored. So it'll be dispersed to different areas. But the main target, the political target, would be the Domino reactor. That is that's the target set that everybody identifies with Israel's nuclear program.
Another interesting thing that surprised me, Scott, is Hezbollah. Hezbollah distanced themselves from getting involved in this attack. I would have expected Iran's proxies to immediately get involved and support Iran, to even attack Israel before Iran attacks. Yet we saw limited attack from the Houthis, but more importantly, Hezbollah saying, we're not going to get involved, at least not yet. Is that expected? Does that show Hezbollah breaking away from Iran as Iran is weakened?
It's not that Hezbollah is breaking. What people tend to forget is that Hezbollah is no longer simply a resistance group or a militia. Hezbollah is a political party, and it's part of the Lebanese government. And for Hezbollah to survive, it must have the support of the Lebanese people. And at this juncture, the Lebanese government, especially since they had an election with a new pro-Western president, Aoun, the Lebanese government isn't going to allow Hezbollah to become an active participant in this conflict. This is a conflict between Israel and Iran. This is not an extension of, for instance, the war of escalation in support of Gaza or or Hamas. This is about Iran's nuclear infrastructure and the Iranian regime. And Hezbollah, it's a resistance movement whose legitimacy comes from defending Lebanon against Israel. And so, especially in its weakened condition, I would be very surprised if Hezbollah took action, because what's going to happen is this conflict between Israel and Iran is going to end. And if Hezbollah behaves irresponsibly, it will pay a price afterwards. It'll be increased isolation, increased delegitimization, and potentially, a shunning of Hezbollah by the Lebanese people, which will diminish its impact politically in Lebanon. So I'm not surprised by Hezbollah's reticence in getting involved. This, frankly speaking, isn't their fight. This is between Israel and Iran, not between Israel and Lebanon. And Hezbollah is a Lebanese political party.
So I'm getting reports here from CNN. Dozens of rockets keep hitting Israeli territory in a relentless barrage. Explosions heard are from intercepts or rockets striking the ground. The Israeli military says the attacks are ongoing with no wars in sight. As you said, there's going to be a continuous barrage, and it just depends on the missiles that Iran has left and the launches that it has left, and the ability to launch them. And that will determine what happens next in this war. Scott, how did we get here? Like, it's just sometimes it's difficult to kind of step away and just realize that we're in the midst of a war between Iran and Israel. Something I used to tell my team in the early days of the war, that is a red line that I don't think either side would want to cross. And yet here we are. So my question is, how did we get here? And number two is, how far will this go before this ends? I know it depends on many factors, but could this end up being a regional war?
It is a regional war right now. I mean, it's we just haven't seen it manifested differently. But this is a big deal. How did we get here? We got here by a combination of a couple things. One is I largely blame the United States. The United States has maintained an openly hostile stance towards the Islamic Republic since the formation of the Islamic Republic. We have never forgiven Iran for our failure to rescue our hostages back in 1981. The Desert One fiasco that left 8 American bodies on the soil of Iran. We've never forgiven Iran for that, for taking our diplomats hostage, holding them, and then forcing us into a failed hostage rescue. We haven't forgiven Iran for the 240 plus American Marines and soldiers and sailors that were killed in the bombing of the Marine barracks in Beirut. So we can't move on past that collectively as a nation. We haven't forgiven Iran for its successful support of Iraqi Shia insurgents in Iraq following our invasion and occupation of Iran, where we lost hundreds of American lives in fighting that's directly attributable to Iran's participation. So as a result, we've been unable and unwilling to engage in the kind of diplomacy that could have resolved this problem from the beginning. Iran's nuclear program began because Iran had a legitimate need for nuclear energy. It's a nation that produces oil. Everybody says, well, they have more than enough oil. Yes, except if you're an expanding economy that ends up using a greater share of the oil that should be exported, therefore denying you the income that's supposed to be derived. The purpose of the Iranian nuclear program was to generate electricity that would free up oil that could then be exported, increasing revenue streams so Iran's economy could grow. It's a vision that grew up in the Shah. Everybody's like, well, that's just the Ayatollahs trying to pull a fast one on you. No, the Shah actually came up with this concept in the 70s. It was supported by the Ford administration. We agreed with it. We said, this makes sense. We actually allowed the Shah to begin designing the Bushehr reactor. But then when the Islamic Republic came in, we pulled the plug on it and we denied them the ability to fulfill their ambition. They were compelled to go to the black market. And then Israel and the United States chose to use that as an excuse to bring the collapse of the regime, imposing sanctions, etc. We could have stalled this thing from the beginning by just allowing Iran to have access to the technologies it's permitted to have under Article 4 of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. But we didn't. We've always had a policy of regime change toward Iran. And that policy has been mirrored by the Israelis, who have used the threat of Iran's nuclear program as justification for these policies. But then the other side to blame, and I've said this, I get a lot of flack for it, but Iran is to blame because Iran has turned a source of national pride into a source of potential national suicide. Look at those missiles. Yep.
Wow.
That's a saturation
attack.
Striking. This is what happens when Israel runs out of interceptor missiles. That's called a saturation
all of them are landing.
Attack. Yep. I would say that 90% of them are landing.
Most of them, some are being intercepted, but most of them.
Yeah, even what we call an interception. Remember, the Iranians, their warheads here. I love what, I'm sorry, this is what I used to do for a living, but I love watching these videos. These are warheads that have decoys. So a lot of what we see, it might be interceptions, are actually Israel hitting decoys, not the actual missile.
Look, they're still hitting. This is live, Scott.
Yep. I mean, this is stunning. These are missiles that also have
they're still ongoing.
Acceleration capability. So you see this missile coming in right now, it's maneuvering and it's accelerating. So it's coming in and it's adjusting to hit the target. These are precise strikes. Whatever's on the ground there isn't anymore. So this is Israel waking up to the fact that Iran is a modern industrial state with extremely advanced capabilities. It also should be a warning to the United States and anybody else that thinks ballistic missile defense can save us. I don't want to get too off topic here, but the Golden Dome that President Trump has spoken about is based upon technology that either doesn't work, doesn't exist, will never work, and will cost us trillions of dollars by the time it's done. Let this be proof to us that missile defense doesn't work, and the best way you protect yourself against a ballistic missile attack is to have good diplomacy to avoid conflict to begin with, which is what should have happened. But Iran allowed itself to become what they call a threshold state. They enriched uranium to go ahead. I see your finger up.
I was going to make a quick correction. So the video, and I was wondering, I was checking my team. The video that I said was live was just a footage that just came in. So it was a loop. So we saw these many missiles land.
Right. It was just a single.
It was the same one again, exactly. So, but it's
I
still a
figured that out
significant amount of missiles landed.
Yeah, I was looking at the behavior of the warheads going in and going, that looks exactly like the one I just saw before.
Exactly. It looked very, very similar. But if I do get anything wrong, please do correct me. Never feel bad to correct me. But you were saying, I want you to continue the previous point you're making, and I'll keep feeding you information as they come in.
No, the point is, and I cautioned Iran, I've been saying this for many months, you don't wave a red flag in front of the Israeli bull. If you don't want the Israelis to charge, don't give them an excuse. And, Iran should have left its program limited to 3.75% enrichment necessary for its legitimate peaceful nuclear purposes, at the maximum 20% limited run to produce fuel for the Tehran research reactor. But anything above that, there's no reason for it other than to threaten the ability to enrich up to weapons grade uranium. And so when Iran got to 60%, they're one enrichment cycle away from weapons grade. And then you have Iranian officials and generals. Many of the people killed, by the way, were people who had said Iran is ready to make the next step to nuclear weapons. And then Israel said they had intelligence that Iran was preparing to do that. And so they launched this strike. But if Iran had just ratcheted down its nuclear posture, there would have been no excuse for Israel to do this. But what Iran did by behaving what it did, it gave the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, the ability to issue a Board of Governors report that said Iran is in non-compliance. This provides political cover for the Israelis. I'm not saying what the Israelis did was legal. It's not. It's an illegal act. It had no authority under international law. But the Israelis can make the case that we had no choice but to do this because of what Iran was doing. Iran simply could have refused this, not by... Boom.
This is a third wave you're seeing right now. This is a third wave. It's one missile striking. The third wave, as you were speaking, the reports, the third wave has begun hitting Israel as we speak. How many waves would you expect, Scott, considering your expertise?
Well, I mean, it depends on how many missiles are available. Again, this is a speculation on my part. I'm not privy to Iran's plans. I would expect about 6 waves in the 6th one, because the way I think is that I'm going to I just go through in my mind, it's rough calculations, but what missile saturation does, meaning how many air defense missiles are available to Israel, how many waves it would take to exhaust that, and then how many waves of intelligence information I would need to be able to put that sixth and decisive blow into Iran. But again, this is just speculation on my part. I don't know what Iran's capabilities are. I don't know how many missiles they have, but clearly they have enough to launch. What is this, a third wave?
Yeah, I'm just looking now at the footage of the third wave. The team will stream it in a second, but this is the footage here we're looking at earlier.
Yeah, boom, boom. I mean, look, guys,
yeah.
this is.
Let me play it again here for
you. This is a bad day for Israel.
Did you anticipate this? Wow.
Well, yeah, this is what we saw. If you remember Operation True Promise 2, this is what we saw at the end of Operation True Promise 2 when they sent that final wave in, and every single missile that went in hit the target. That's what Iran is capable of doing, and now Iran is doing it. And the interesting thing will be if Iran can do this tomorrow night, and the next night, and the next night, because that's how you break Israel's back. If Iran repeats this 4 nights in a row, 5 nights in a row, Israel can't survive this politically. They can't survive this. It'll be the end of the Netanyahu regime. So that's Iran's only hope. Because
so the goal is essentially strike Israel enough where the war becomes unpopular for Iranians, and Netanyahu is forced to stop the war and not continue this war. Because right now there's a lot of support behind him because he's been successful against Hezbollah. Gaza has a different discussion, and he seems to be successful against Iran. Obviously, this seems to be changing right now. So the goal is for Iran to strike Israel enough for Netanyahu to change his mind or find some sort of agreement to avoid losing the support of the people.
I don't know about changing Netanyahu's mind. The goal is to strike Israel enough for the Netanyahu's government to collapse, to get a vote of no confidence, and to be removed from office as the prime minister of Israel. That, I believe, is the Iranian goal at this point in time, because then you've achieved a political victory, and you also now, when you go into whatever negotiations may take place, you come in from a very strong position, a position in the past, people could threaten Iran, but if Iran has just demonstrated the ability to bring Israel to its knees, then that changes everything in negotiation. That's Iran's only hope. I firmly believe that Iran has no choice but to deliver the maximum harm to Israel. They have to be careful not to kill too many civilians. They're going to kill civilians. That's just the reality of war. But if they can focus these attacks on critical infrastructure, on military sites, on leadership sites, I think they can break the back of the Israeli people are not conditioned to do this. They're not conditioned to live like this, and they don't want to live like this. And if this becomes their future, they don't want to have any part of it. And you will see hundreds of thousands of Israelis flee Israel. And once Israel starts voluntarily depopulating, that's the end of Israel.
So the third wave is already starting to strike Israel as we speak. So the next question is, how far will Israel go, in your opinion, to be able? So they're going to strike the nuclear facilities. They struck a lot of the military commanders. Will they continue striking more military bases? Will they start striking infrastructure as they did in Lebanon in 2006? It was, or they don't need to go that far. Just the nuclear facilities and the military commanders is more than enough for this attack.
Iran's not Lebanon. I mean, with Lebanon striking southern Lebanon, then expanding the strikes into a limited geographic space was something that the Israeli military could do. Remember that Beirut was an undefended space. If the reports are accurate, Israel lost at least 2 aircraft going in, and that many of the missiles that were shot into Iran were shot down. So the Iran looks like it's rebuilding its defensive capability and exerting an offensive strike capability. So, this is this changes everything. The Israelis were hoping that Iran would be defenseless, laying down on the ground, unable to defend itself, and that would break the Iranian spirit. It appears that the Iranians absorbed the attack, suffered losses, but now they've rebuilt or reconstituted their air defense. And the Israelis haven't figured that code out. The Israelis can't keep special operations forces on the ground indefinitely. In fact, I would be surprised if there continues to be special forces guys on the ground, because right now Iran is mobilized and those boys are on the run or they've already been pulled out. So Israel's capacity, the diversity of operations they've shown are diminished now. They have limited strike capabilities. This is what I always said about Israel, is that Israel can start a war with Iran, but they can't finish it. They don't have sufficient forces to sustain a meaningful air attack against Iran. They gave Iran their Sunday punch, the knockout blow, didn't go down. Iran now is retaliating. We don't know how much longer Iran can do this, but if I were doing a quick analysis, it just appears that Israel is the scales are tipping. Now the question is what Israel will do next. The only escalation Israel can bring that's meaningful is either attempting to take out the regime. Take out the regime, or to use nuclear weapons. And using nuclear weapons would be fatal to the existence of Israel.
Oh, okay. For Iran to use nuclear weapons, you mean?
No, Iran doesn't have nuclear weapons. I'm saying the only escalation.
Yeah, exactly.
Israel
That's why I was surprised. So Israel, but he said Israel, but that would be fatal for the existence of Israel. Is that what he said, or the existence of Iran?
No, the fatal. Well, it would be dangerous for Iran, potentially fatal, but it would be the end of Israel, because what it would do is expose Israel as a rogue nation compatible with modern.
Exactly.
So Israel will be foolish to use them.
Exactly. Like, is it fair to say that there's no way? I think someone mentioned it in our previous panel, but there is no way Israel will use a nuclear weapon. They'll lose all the support of the US and other allies. Is that a fair statement? Or that is a possibility we should consider? Wow.
Benjamin Netanyahu
concerns me.
Yeah, Benjamin Netanyahu is an unstable man. He's surrounded by people who have a vision of Israel, greater Israel, which is biblical in nature. And when you start, I'm sorry, I don't mean to insult people, but when you start blending biblical notions with real life, you create the potential for apocalyptic behavior. So as long as Israel has nuclear weapons and they have a government governed by somebody as grossly irresponsible as Benjamin Netanyahu, you can never take those nuclear weapons off the table when it comes to an issue of existential survival. If Iran is able to sustain these strikes the way they are right now, because it looks like Israel is defenseless, if Iran can sustain these strikes and the United States and Russia are unable to bring this conflict to an end, Benjamin Netanyahu may threaten the use of nuclear weapons. We know that after True Promise 2, Israel deployed their nuclear weapons into operational space, meaning they were out there available to be used. So I can't take Israel's nuclear weapons.
Sorry, when was that, Scott? When was it?
That back in October of last year. So, we know that Israel has these weapons and that they factor them into their thinking. But for Israel to use nuclear weapons, it would be the end of Israel in terms of its legitimacy worldwide, that the world would actually
I'd be surprised. But do you think Israel, I wouldn't say has the capacity, but will have the audacity or the ability to launch a nuclear missile without the US giving them the okay?
I don't see any circumstance under which the United States would give them the okay. So if Israel
exactly. So based on this, could Israel do it without the US's agreement?
Yeah, let me give you an example from history, if I may. During the Gulf War, as Iraq fired Scud missiles into Israel, the Israelis were desperate to retaliate, but the United States wouldn't let them because Israeli involvement in the conflict would have broken up the coalition and made it difficult to defeat Iraq. So the Israelis wanted to send a signal. The Israelis have a missile, the Jericho 2 missile, which is a nuclear-capable missile. And the Israelis always said that if Iran used chemical weapons or biological weapons against Israel, that it would use a nuclear weapon against Iraq. And to give that threat backup, they test-fired a Jericho 2 missile, the exact range, the distance that it would take to hit Baghdad, but they flew it into the Mediterranean. They did this, without the permission of the United States. It was a signal not just to Iraq, but more importantly to the United States, who monitored all this. I know because I was there doing the monitoring. And the signal was, if you can't solve this problem and it gets out of hand, we have the solution. And the solution is a Jericho 2 with a nuclear warhead that we will fire into Baghdad and take out Saddam Hussein. So Israel has made moves to use nuclear weapons without the permission of the United States in the past. And if things get desperate enough, if Israel is facing a situation where they have no defense and Iran is just pounding them and pounding them and pounding them, Israel may threaten to use nuclear weapons to bring it into the conflict.
You know, nothing is impossible. I never thought would be a disposition of a direct conflict between Iran and Israel. There's a statement that just came in as you're speaking from the Supreme Leader Khamenei. He said, the Zionist regime, as in Israel, will not remain unscathed from the consequences of its crime. The Iranian nation must be guaranteed that our response will not be half-measured. Tehran's framing this as open conflict and signal. Oh, this is just an analysis. I mean, that statement is not out of the ordinary, something you'd expect from the Khamenei. Is that a statement? Does it mean anything to you, or that's just expected?
Well, you know, the Supreme Leader is the final voice of authority, and so what you would expect if you're doing a rhetorical escalation is that you would have lower officials up to and including the president make statements, but you withhold the Supreme Leader so that you have flexibility. But when the Supreme Leader commits, remember, he's not in the Iranian system. He is an extension of God. He is a religious figure whose position is mandated by God. So his word is absolute, not to be contradicted either by himself or by others. So for him to make this commitment is a big deal. It means that the Iranian nation is committed to this outcome, and it's irreversible.
Okay, so I'm getting reports now that the waves seem to have ended, or at least they've taken a pause. Would you usually see pauses between waves of attacks, or are they usually one after the other to overwhelm the system, the defense system?
Well, I don't know enough about Iran's intelligence capabilities. These three waves seem to come very close together, which means that there's very little time to process data. And so what we may have seen is this three waves coming in, and now there's a pause to make adjustments. And then we could see the waves continue, or this could be it. But Khamenei's statement implies that this is going to be a far more decisive strike. So I would anticipate additional waves. But again, I don't know what Iran's capacities are.
So I just got a message here. I'm asking for the source. I'm not sure if you're aware of this already, but I just got a message now. I'm asking for clarification. They promised to strike the heads of Iran if they responded. Please clarify. I don't know what they mean by this. They wouldn't strike. Israel wouldn't strike the political leaders, not the military leaders, but trying to strike the political leaders, as close as possible to Khamenei. Obviously, they did strike his advisor and the negotiator, the nuclear deal. Could they continue striking more political leaders? So they already hit the head of the IRGC, the head of the Air Force. But again, these are military targets.
Those military leaders, yeah. What's interesting, if that statement's coming from Israel, that implies that Iran has targeted Israeli political leadership, and that this would be an Israeli retaliation. So I'm interested to see what the Iranians hit and what they targeted, and that tells us a lot about their priorities and what Israel's potential response will be.
The team is getting me the statement now. Could Iran strike political leaders of Israel? Like, is there still lines? Like, usually there's generally like rules of engagement. You don't strike these facilities. We don't strike those facilities. You only strike. You only cause us that much damage. We cause you this much damage. That's what we've seen with Hezbollah before Israel went all out, and that's what we saw Iran until yesterday. Is there still any lines, or have all the rules just gone out of the window, other than nuclear weapons and potentially not the heads of state, and maybe the Strait of Hormuz? But I think that's on the table now.
Or oil and oil. We'll see what Israel promised to hit oil facilities. The United States, I believe, would probably strongly encourage the Israelis not to hit oil facilities.
Exactly. So, I think that would go well against Trump and his.
That would not be
the economy.
Something. Look, political leadership is a red line, I believe. If they start striking the Ayatollah, what they need to, the Israelis know this. I know this because I worked with the Israelis when we were trying to decipher Saddam Hussein, and I sat down with Israeli intelligence officials who were intimately knowledgeable about Iraqi tribal structure and the relationship of the Khams, the five families, and all this. The intimacy of knowledge they had about how Arab society functioned and Tikriti society functioned in Iraq. So they have to know about Iran and how Iran functions, and they have to know about the assembly of experts. They have to know that the Iranians have already picked the successor of Ayatollah Khamenei, and that if they kill him, there will be an automatic replacement, and that the Iranians just don't simply blow away like the wind if you take out Khamenei. That the legitimacy comes from, from a spiritual source. So I don't know what they think they're going to be accomplishing by doing this. Just like I believe the Iranians understand that if you kill Benjamin Netanyahu, you actually weaken yourself, because what you want is Netanyahu to collapse from within. That should be the Israeli objective, by the way, is to get the supreme leader's credibility as a leader to collapse from within. Then you achieve real regime change. But if you go around killing heads of state so that the states now rally around the dead figures as martyrs and replace them with people who are committed to seeking vengeance on behalf of the assassinated people, that's not how you end a war. There's a reason why we didn't kill the emperor in World War II.
I've got a chart here. The source is Al Jazeera. It goes through the military capabilities of Israel and Iran, Scott. So active personnel, Israel's at 170,000, Iran's at 610,000. So that's between the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Air Defense, and the IRGC. Now, let's go through one by one. So let's go through the personnel. Active personnel, 170,000 to 610,000, Israel to Iran. Reserve, Israel has 465,000, Iran has 350,000. How important is this number, this metric, when looking at the military capabilities of both sides? And then we'll go to the defense budget and the rest of the artillery, the air defense system, the combat aircrafts, etc.
Well, Israel and Iran share no common border. So the likelihood of Israeli divisions squaring off against Iranian divisions are very slim. I mean, Iran would have to physically occupy Iraq and physically drive through Syria to get there. And, that's logistically very difficult to do and operationally tough. Long lines of communication, susceptible to interdiction. So these numbers are meaningless, to be honest. What you need to focus on is strike aircraft, missiles, air defense, and with
I'll give you
Iran,
those numbers, Scott, which you probably know. So combat capable aircrafts, 345 for Israel, 312 plus an extra 23 for the IRGC for Iran. And obviously, those are older jets. I think most are older Russian MiG fighter jets and Sukhoi fighter jets. Israel has F-35s, US-made F-35s. That seems, especially based on what we've seen over the last 24 hours, just a big discrepancy there in the capabilities of both sides.
Right, but Iran's not striking Israel with Iranian Air Force aircraft. So take those out of the picture.
Why? Is that because of Israel's air defense system? And the U.S.
Yes, and also the aircraft that Iran have aren't conducive to long-range strike. These are tactical aircraft, to be used to defend Iranian airspace, as opposed to projecting power into Israel. So,
another question. Sorry for my lack of expertise, but couldn't they intercept the F-35s? So they don't have those capabilities whatsoever.
Anything can be intercepted. I mean, the Serbians shot down an F-117 stealth fighter during the Kosovo conflict. The F-35 is always at risk. We've heard stories about how the Houthi in less sophisticated air defense were able to lock on to F-35s and cause American F-35s to break off attack runs. I would think that the Iranians or the Israelis would limit their exposure, meaning that most of the attacks seem to be from standoff weapons that could be delivered by Israeli aircraft from within Iraqi airspace, and that it would be a very limited thing to have aircraft in it. They were talking about Israel losing F-16s, maybe up to 2 F-16s in this strike. Why would they be losing F-16s? Well, if the F-16s were providing combat cover for instance, the extraction of special operations forces, then you would need an F-16 to be physically over the airspace. But it's a very dangerous thing to put your aircraft into Iranian airspace when you don't need to. This is why Israel has the standoff weapons. But Iran doesn't need them. Iran has its ballistic missile strike force, which tonight has demonstrated through at least 3 waves of being able to penetrate air defense and strike targets in Israel. So those are the for Iran, you need to focus on air defense and ballistic missile strike. Those are the two things that are most important right now. And for Israel, you need to focus on air defense and their Air Force's ability to strike. These are the two factors that go in. How many armored divisions you have is irrelevant in this regard, because those forces.
What about the submarines, Scott? So we've got 5 for Israel, obviously more advanced, and 17 for Iran. Do these make a difference whatsoever?
Not in this fight. The submarines for Iran are used to defend coastal waters, maybe some power projection into the Red Sea, etc. For Israel, they have some cruise missile launch capabilities, but strictly speaking, you're going to get far more devastating results with the weapons that Israel has already used than you are adding a handful of cruise missiles and putting a submarine at risk.
And I want to, the last topic I want to close out on is the point you made earlier, the possibility of a regime change in Iran. I want to dig into this further. We know that Prince Reza Pahlavi, which the panel was debating how much influence he has in Israel, he said, I can't read out, I don't want to read out the whole tweet, but he says, my message to the military, law enforcement, and security forces is clear. This regime and its corrupt and incompetent leaders do not value your lives or of Iran or our Iran. Separate yourself from them and join the people. And we then saw, I think, a photo of an Israeli official that he took with Prince Reza Pahlavi just a few hours ago. It says coming soon or something along those lines. Not sure if you saw that photo. 2 questions there. First, what is the likelihood of a regime change with Iran? 3. Number 2 is that Israel's goal or long-term goal with these attacks? And number 3, how big of a role will the prince play in this?
Well, let's go back to 2023, the summer of 2023. If you remember, there was that tragic incident of the Kurdish girl who was arrested because of a hijab violation, and she went to an Iranian police center where she died under circumstances that are under dispute. But the bottom line is it triggered massive social unrest in Iran that led to confrontation between a population that was losing faith in the government. This was then exploited by every intelligence service who had a proxy force available. You saw massive uprisings. It became a virtual civil war. I had the opportunity to speak to President Raisi in September about this. And what he said was that this was the greatest threat to Iran that it had ever experienced since the Iran-Iraq war, that the public uprising supported by foreign intelligence service was a very big stress on the Iranian government, the regime, etc. But they were able to overcome it, and that they actually emerged from this stronger because it proved that the Iranian people, when put under pressure, wouldn't flake off and go join the opposition, but would rather rally around the government. And what the government's done since then, I don't know if you've seen photographs coming out of Tehran, women aren't wearing the hijab. They aren't wearing the head covering. There's women out there who are walking with their hair exposed. So Iran has made the social changes necessary to win the support of the population. I don't believe that Iran is susceptible to the kind of outside regime change forces that it was vulnerable to in 2023. I think that the Israeli attack is guaranteed that will never happen. I think, if anything, the people of Iran are going to rally even closer around. The assassination of Qasem Soleimani rallied closely around. So I don't think that the Iranian regime is vulnerable. I think that there's a gross miscalculation by both Israel and the United States and Europe, who are heavily involved in these regime change activities, about the vulnerability of the Iranian government, the supreme leader. As for the prince, look, he's a paid puppet of Israel. He has support from MI6 and the CIA. But if he stepped foot on the ground in Iran, he would be ripped apart from head to toe. He has no support whatsoever amongst the mainstream. He is a descendant of Reza Shah Pahlavi, a man who ran Savak, a man who tortured Iranians, who suppressed freedom. There is no love in Iran for Reza Shah Pahlavi.
Okay. And then the last question for you, Scott, is what do we expect to see over the next 5 and 10 days? Number 1, and number 2, how long do you think this war will continue?
Well, I mean, again, it's now a question of sustainment versus escalation. Israel launched some attacks today that in Iran appeared to be able to deflect, meaning that there wasn't a decisive second strike against especially Tehran, etc. Iran's retaliation tonight at least looked impressive visually, as if Israel is defenseless, that Israel has lost the capacity to defend itself. Tomorrow, is Israel going to try and continue to be deflected, and Iran then comes and strikes Israel and leaves it defenseless? Or is Israel going to have to escalate, hit a different target deck, try to expand this conflict? Israel's goal at this point in time, if having failed to achieve the collapse of the regime and the weakening of the regime, is to draw the United States.
Before you finish, just came in now. I think you'd want to hear this. Channel 13 just put out unprecedented destruction in the greater Tel Aviv area, the likes which we have never seen before. And then Israel's Katz, the Minister of Defense of Israel, just said Iran has crossed every red line. So this seems like a successful attack by Iran.
It's a tremendously successful attack. So now the question is, what does Israel do? Do they escalate? Now, do they seek to escalate? Israel has to ask its question, how long can Iran sustain these attacks? Because Israel cannot defend itself. That's it. It was proven tonight that Israel's defense shield does not work. Israel cannot defend itself. So if Iran is capable of sustaining these attacks, then that's a problem for Israel, which now means they either have to do a negotiated settlement, which they're not going to do at this juncture because they're not defeated yet. They're growing to the realization they can't win, or escalate to try and draw the United States in. And I think that's probably going to be Israel's next step, is to do some sort of escalation that will draw the United States in.
So I'm going to keep you a bit longer if you don't mind, Scott. So we're going to just share footage now of the moment the defense ministry got hit. The team's going to share it now. And while they're sharing it, are they about to share it now? So that's an air defense missile being launched. So while this is playing, I'm not sure if this footage will show it being hit. Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is the defense ministry.
Yeah, the Kyria. Yeah.
Would you have expected that to get hit?
I expect to be the first target hit. Symbolically, it has to be the first target because the Israelis assassinated several senior Iranian defense officials. So the first target that must be struck in Israel has to be the Kyria. I would also believe that Iran would have targeted Domona, although I don't know, because the Iranians right now have sort of a high card. I mean, they have the high ground, because if there is radiation detected out of Natanz, which some people have suggested, that means that Israel has violated every red line when it comes to striking nuclear facilities. And the IAEA has already called Israel out for this. Israel may be losing the world on this one. I mean, you get that first night of ooh, ah, oh, drones, oh, special forces. But then the reality of what Israel has done starts to sink home. It's a violation of international law, a violation of every norm and standard that exists in the world. And they attacked a nuclear facility, causing the leakage of radiation.
More than,
that's bad news.
Exactly. They attacked at least 3 nuclear facilities. I know, because initially they only attacked one, the main one, the Natanz nuclear facility.
Right.
Then now we have reports that they've attacked 2 others, Fordo and Isfahan, and I'm not sure if they attacked Bushehr or not. I've got conflicting reports.
No, they haven't attacked the reactor at Bushehr. Firdos is underground, so they're just not going to do any penetration there. They would be attacking external structures.
They don't think they can, but they can't penetrate it underground?
No, not even close. The only thing that gives Firdos is a nuclear bomb. That's it. And so the other one, Isfahan, is yellow cake production, where they make uranium hexafluoride and things of that nature. That's above the ground. That's a chemical process. You destroy you destroy production capacity, but that's easily replicated. So striking Isfahan, it's a shame though. Isfahan's a beautiful city, so I hope they didn't destroy any of the cultural aspects of it. But look, Israel crossed red lines. I mean, they can't talk about Iran crossing red lines. Israel has crossed red lines. And if this thing continues to escalate, who knows where it's going to go? This is a very dangerous situation. Very dangerous situation.
One more question, and I'll ask you the wrap-up question, Scott. The other question I had was a bit surprising. So first, Iran seems to have been caught off guard. how could they be caught this off guard? Is it Trump tricking them by saying, hey, they had the leaks of him telling Israel not to attack, if you remember these leaks, that seemed to be intended to mislead Iran allegedly, or either Trump was not informed. So there's like two points to be made there, two perspectives. And then the other one is, I think there was a meeting that was mentioned between Netanyahu and the Trump administration, or some Israeli officials and the Trump administration. Again, these seem to have been intentionally to mislead Iran. So Iran was caught off guard. Would you agree with that? Is that why the attack was so successful? And the second question is, like, why initially the Iran, as it was attacked, only had 100 drones that were all intercepted? That was the initial attack. Is that normal for them to be that limited in their initial response?
Well, I believe Iran was totally caught off guard, and I believe that a big part of it played into trusting the United States to be serious about negotiations. What we didn't see behind the scenes were the various proposals that were being exchanged. They were talking about some amazing things about letting U.S. inspectors on the ground in Iran to be part of this, talking about a multinational fuel bank that would absorb excess production capacity. These are unprecedented concessions made by Iran, and Iran, of course, has to consider. So it's a deflection when you say, okay, we're going to consider this, consider that. That means that the Iranian government, preparing for Sunday, is bringing its people in to talk about how do we further this inclusion of American inspectors? How do we talk about this fuel bank? What are the technical aspects involved? That's their priority of thought. And as a result, the military, which was probably on a heightened state of alert, calmed down and said, okay, we'll go back to heightened alert on Sunday. So they went into a pause cycle. And that's when the Israelis struck, when Iran was at its weakest. About the drones, look, Israel, I believe, hit Iran very hard. I think they took out, Iran had a standby retaliation capability of a certain number of their ballistic missiles were deployed in the field. I believe Israel took those all out. Wow. And the only thing left for Iran in terms of an immediate response was to fire off drones. Iran had to do something, had to send a signal that we aren't surrendering. They had to show the people we are responding, because it's psychologically, to receive that kind of Pearl Harbor attack is psychologically devastating. So the regime had to demonstrate we are doing something. They fired 100 drones. They got shot down. Drones are a dime a dozen. It's not the end of the world. But Iran had to, they needed time to recoup, to figure out what assets we have to establish communications with their different missile bases, get an inventory of status, what they're able to do. And then they have to think in terms of a campaign. Okay, how many missiles are we going to launch the first night? How are we going to launch the second night? And so on and so forth. So I think that's why they launched the 100 drones, just as a symbolic act of resistance, until which time they could reconstitute a strike, a retaliation capability.
So just a correction to be made. The Israeli Defense Ministry did not suffer a direct hit from Iranian missiles. 2 Iranian missiles struck within 150 to 300 meters of the compound. So it seems they have missed the compound. But there is a comment here from the Iranian Foreign Ministry. Quote, "We reject any calls for restraint at this time." And that's from the Iranian Foreign Ministry. Is that expected for them to say that, or does that mean anything to you?
I think right now we're in the standard conflict rhetoric that's coming from both sides. But again, to have the foreign ministry say that's okay, because at some point in time, the foreign ministry could be overridden by higher authorities. The lower down this extreme rhetoric is, the better off you are, because that leaves room for somebody up above to go, all right, we've reconsidered. You get worried when that rhetoric comes from the supreme leader, because there's only one person above the supreme leader, and that's God. And if God is speaking on the side of Iran, we're all in a lot of trouble.
So to let you finish with the comment you were making earlier as we were wrapping, is what do you expect to see over the next 5-10 days? You were answering the question before we got interrupted by breaking news.
I feel that Israel, at this juncture, in doing their calculations, either has withheld an additional Sunday punch to take Iran by surprise, meaning that they're going to come in with some other surprises in terms of capabilities. If they can't do that, then you're looking at escalation in terms of striking Iranian oil infrastructure, et cetera. But if Israel doesn't have any more solutions to this, operational solutions, then the only thing they have to do is bring in the United States. And so they will be seeking to bring in the United States. Iran's job right now is to keep the United States out of this conflict. If Iran right now has demonstrated the upper hand, that they have the ability to strike Israel at will, it's in Iran's best interest simply to repeat this every night. And if Israel is indeed losing aircraft and pilots, that's also unsustainable. And who knows what the future holds? Maybe the Iranians will be able to, snatch up a couple special forces teams on the ground. We'll see. This war isn't over. Both sides now are talking about no red lines going forward. So tomorrow will be a very interesting day.
And it's just crazy, the world that we're living in right now. And a few years ago, a war in Ukraine was unthinkable. A war between Israel and Iran was almost unthinkable. And obviously now we're talking about potential conflict between China and the US when it comes to Taiwan.
It's no longer unthinkable.
It's a pretty scary world. Does this war change anything when it comes to Russia, Ukraine, moving attention away? Does that give Russia the ability to continue the war? And does Russia losing a key ally? Obviously Iran's not going to be able to continue sending drones to Russia with the war it's facing. Could that impact Russia's position in the Ukraine war?
Well, Iran's not sending drones to Russia anymore. Iran sent an initial tranche, but Russian defense industry has absorbed these. In fact, the drones that are being launched against Ukraine today, the only thing they have in common with the Shahed 136s that were sent in is their shape. Totally different propulsion, different warheads, different electronic warfare capabilities. Russia has taken those drone designs and made them their own. But that doesn't obviate the fact that Russia owes Iran a huge debt. Iran stepped in at a very critical time when Russia was losing the drone conflict. Russia needed a weapon system to help break Ukraine's air defense systems, and this was the drone. And Iran took a big risk, took great exposure politically and geopolitically to assist Russia. Russia signed a strategic framework agreement with Iran on January 17th of this year. Iran is a BRICS nation. Russia has strategic objectives with Iran, the North-South Economic Corridor seeking to link Russia with Iran through Azerbaijan and others. China just opened up the new Silk Road. These are two nations seeking to position Iran, a BRICS member, to be a critical part of a trans-Eurasian economic union. What does it say if Russia stands by and allows Iran to be picked off by Israel and the United States? This regime change operation fundamentally changes the whole calculation with BRICS and the concept of a multipolar world. So I think we're going to see Russia becoming very heavily engaged diplomatically. I think it's important for Iran to establish its own the ability to stand up on its own 2 feet and punch back, which they did tonight, and maybe they can do that over the next next couple of days. But Russia can't afford to allow Israel and the United States to pluck Iran out of the BRICS membership. That would be devastating to BRICS. It would be a huge blow to Russia's credibility and China's credibility. So I think you're going to see.
Could we see any military support of Iran by China or Russia?
I don't believe so.
Again,
China
nothing is unthinkable anymore. I'm asking the questions I would have never asked.
Yeah, no, I mean China doesn't have force projection capacity, but what you would see from China, in my opinion, is a statement being sent to the United States to the effect of, karma is a bitch. Excuse my language. What goes around comes around. You pluck off Iran, Taiwan's history, pal. You think you can go around and pluck Iran off? We're telling you right now, Taiwan's history. If you want to save Taiwan, knock this nonsense off. I do think you can see hints of that nature. And for Russia, I think they need to send a signal to the United States, too, that while Russia is willing to absorb American stupidity in Ukraine because it's, simply momentum derived from previous failed mistakes, Russia cannot tolerate America behaving irresponsibly on the Russian periphery. And Iran is a strategic part of Russia's future going forward. I don't see Russian missiles flying, but I do see Russia making it clear to the United States that if you want to have Russian cooperation in other projects, this thing has to come to an end. Israel overstepped its bounds, and frankly, Donald Trump, you overstepped your bounds. Iran could be, everybody looking at saying it's the United States reasserting its role. but I actually see it sort of the high watermark of American hegemony, meaning this is Pickett's charge. That's it. That they're not getting any further, because China is going to draw a line on Taiwan, and that's the end of Taiwan. And Russia will draw a line saying, not only will we no longer cooperate on Ukraine, but we're not going to cooperate on anything because you are the threat. You are the existential.
Do you think Russia could leverage the Ukraine war and the peace negotiations, and China leverage the tariff negotiations to pressure
China
the US?
can do the tariff. Russia can't. Russia has no flexibility on Ukraine. This is an existential struggle for Russia. That's why they've poured all the resources into it. And the Ukraine conflict only ends with the strategic defeat of Ukraine. Russia's not going to give that up for anybody, because now we're talking about Mother Russia. But Russia would show flexibility on other issues that it's engaging with the United States, that the United States is deemed to be critical for its national security going forward. But if the United States wants to try and pick Iran off in this way, Russia can't sit back and let it happen. So I do think that there would be consequences for America's actions. And if you get Russia and China stepping in diplomatically to warn America of the dire consequences, and Iran is able to stand up on its own 2 feet and continue to deliver punches to Israel, you could see a negotiation to the settlement that is the detriment of Israel and to the benefit of Iran.
Last piece of news, Scott, as we wrap up. IDF did tell civilians you can exit the shelters, but don't go too far. Civilians told to leave shelters, but stay near them in case Iran attacks again. So it seems the waves are over, but as you said, waves could continue throughout the night, depending on Iran's capacity, what's left over after Israel's attack. Scott, pleasure to have you. Really appreciate it under these circumstances. We essentially had, as we were doing our interview that was pre-scheduled, the attack by Iran against Israel was happening live. So it's a pretty surreal moment. Reminds me of the day that October 7th was happening. We started the space as the attacks continued throughout the next couple of days, and then Israel launched the war there. So it's pretty crazy times ahead, but I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks, Scott.